Ever feel like you're just drowning in information? Wishing someone could, I don't know, just boil it all down to what really matters. Well, you definitely come to the right place. Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being truly well-informed, minus the noise. Today, we're diving deep into a really foundational document from the Catholic Church, Dignitatis Humanae. That's the Declaration on Religious Freedom. It was promulgated by Pope Paul VI way back on December 7, 1965. And look, this isn't just some dry theological text. It's a declaration that profoundly shapes how we understand human rights, faith in society, all that. So our mission today, let's unpack its core principles, try to get the nuances, and see how it champions, individual liberty and the role of religious communities.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating, I think, is how it taps into this growing global sense of the dignity of the human person and this modern demand that people should act on their own judgment, using responsible freedom, not being pushed around or coerced. It really is like a bridge between long-held doctrine and these very contemporary human hopes for freedom.
Okay, right, let's dig into that. The document kicks off by noticing this widespread desire for freedom, for responsible action, especially about, freely practicing religion. So what does the council actually propose about these desires?
Well, it takes them very seriously. It doesn't just note them, it declares they're greatly in accord with the truth and justice, which is pretty strong language. And then comes the core statement, the really big one. The human person has a right to religious freedom. That was huge at the time.
Okay, religious freedom.
Yeah.
How is that actually defined here? Like, what does it mean in practical terms for you, the listener?
Right. It means immunity from coercion. That's the key. Immunity from individuals, social groups, any human power. So basically, no one can force you to act against your own beliefs, period. Doesn't matter if it's private, public, alone, or with others. Though it does add that qualifier within due limits. We'll probably get to that later.
Yeah, definitely. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The basis for this, right? It's not just, oh, I feel like I should be free.
Exactly. That's crucial. The rights foundation isn't in your subjective mood or preference. It's in your very nature, your dignity as a person endowed with reason and free will. And this dignity, you can know it through God's revealed word, but also just by reason itself. And because of that, this right isn't just a nice idea. It has to be recognized in law, constitutional law. It should become a civil right.
Okay, so this then leads to the big question many people have. What about the traditional Catholic teaching? The one true religion, the duty to seek it out. Does this focus on freedom water that down?
That's a really important clarification the document makes. It explicitly says it leaves untouched traditional Catholic doctrine on the moral duty of men and societies toward the true religion and toward the one Church of Christ.
This doesn't cancel that out.
Not at all. The religious freedom right here is specifically about immunity from coercion in civil society. It's about how you interact with government, with other people, with human power structures. It's not about your internal moral obligation to seek truth. The document actually reaffirms that. It says people are bound by a moral obligation to seek the truth, especially religious truth, and then, to embrace the truth they come to know and to hold fast to it.
Yeah.
But that obligation, it falls on the human conscience, not on the police or the state enforcing it.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. It's a civil liberty shield, distinct from a personal, moral, theological duty. Okay, now let's talk practice. Religion isn't just lived alone in your head. How does this freedom apply beyond just one person, communities, families?
Yeah, exactly. Our social nature means we need to express our internal beliefs externally, so that immunity from coercion, it's also the right of people when they act together in community. Religious communities have rights to govern themselves, worship publicly, help their members, teach, set up schools, charities, you name it.
And what specific rights do they have against, say, government interference? What can't the government block them from doing?
Well, the document lists quite a few things. They have the right not to be hindered by laws or administrative actions in choosing and training their own ministers, appointing them, transferring them. Also, communicating with religious authorities abroad, building religious buildings, acquiring and using funds or property needed for their work.
Okay.
And importantly, the right to public teaching and witnessing to their faith, spoken or written. It's pretty comprehensive.
But there's a really crucial line here about how you spread the faith. A boundary, really.
Yeah.
Which I think is vital for you listening to know.
Whoa, absolutely vital, yes. While you have the right to witness and teach, it says, everyone ought at all times to refrain from any manner of action which might seem to carry a hint of coercion or of a kind of persuasion that would be dishonorable or unworthy, especially when dealing with poor or uneducated people. That kind of action. It's called an abuse of one's right and a violation of the right of others. So no manipulation, no pressure tactics.
That's a strong ethical guideline built right in. Okay, what about the family, the basic unit? How does religious freedom work there?
The family is called a society in its own original right, meaning it has its own inherent rights, specifically the right to freely live its own domestic religious life under the guidance of parents. And crucially, parents have the right to decide the kind of religious education that their children are to receive.
The education piece. That's often contentious.
Very. And the document says the government must acknowledge parents' right to freely choose schools or other means of education, and parental rights are violated if kids are forced to attend lessons or instructions which are not in agreement with their religious beliefs, or if there's only one school system available and it totally excludes any religious formation. That's seen as a violation.
Right. So given all these rights, individual, community, family, what's the flip side? What's the responsibility of government and society as a whole regarding religious freedom? It sounds like more than just hands off.
Oh, definitely more. The duty to care for this right falls on everyone: citizens, social groups, government, the church itself, other religious communities. But protecting and promoting all fundamental human rights is called an essential duty of government.
Essential duty. Okay.
So the government has to safeguard religious freedom for all citizens, effectively, through just laws and other appropriate means. And it should even help create conditions that are favorable to the fostering of religious life, not just tolerate it, but help it flourish in a way.
Okay, but what about those situations, we still see them today, where a country gives special legal recognition to one specific religion? Does that automatically violate the rights of others?
Not necessarily, according to the document. If special civil recognition is given to one community, it stresses that it is at the same time imperative that the right of all citizens and religious communities to religious freedom should be recognized and made effective.
So recognition for one doesn't mean suppression for others.
Exactly. No discrimination is allowed on religious grounds. It explicitly says it's wrong for government to use force, fear, or other means to impose or repudiate any religion, or to stop people from joining or leaving a religious community and using force to destroy or oppress religion anywhere. That's called a violation of the will of God. Pretty strong stuff.
Okay, this raises the inevitable question, though. Are there any limits? You mentioned due limits earlier. Can people just claim religious freedom for absolutely anything?
No, it's not absolute. The document is clear. Exercising freedom is subject to certain regulatory norms. There's a moral principle of personal and social responsibility. Basically, individuals and groups have to respect the rights of others, their own duties to others, and the common welfare of all. You can't just claim freedom to harm others or disrupt society fundamentally.
So who decides what those limits are? Who draws the line? Is it just the government?
Well, society has a right to protect itself against abuses committed on the pretext of freedom of religion. And yes, it falls to government to provide that protection. But, and this is a big but, government can't act arbitrarily or unfairly like playing favorites. Its actions have to be controlled by juridical norms, actual laws that align with the objective moral order.
Objective moral order.
If these norms come from practical needs, safeguarding everyone's rights, peacefully settling conflicts, maintaining public peace, and guarding public morality. These things together basically make up public order. And freedom should only be limited when and insofar as necessary to protect that public order. It's meant to be a high bar for government interference.
Got it. So let's step back a bit. Where does this really strong emphasis on freedom, especially coming from an institution like the Catholic Church, truly come from? Is it just, adapting to modern times, or are there deeper roots claimed?
Right. It claims both, really. It definitely grounds it in the dignity of the person, which it says we know through reason and experience over centuries. But then it explicitly states this doctrine of freedom also has roots in divine revelation. That's key. It's presented not just as a good modern idea, but as something fundamentally true within its own religious framework.
And here's a major connection they make, right? A core Catholic teaching. Man's response to God in faith must be free. No one is to be forced to embrace the Christian faith against his own will. That seems pretty direct.
Absolutely pivotal connection, yes. Faith, it says, is by its very nature a free act. Therefore, this principle of religious freedom actually helps create the right environment, an environment where people can be invited to Christian faith without hindrance, embrace it freely, and live it out fully. The argument is that authentic faith requires freedom. Coerced faith isn't real faith.
And they trace this back to Jesus himself and the apostles. How do they show this kind of non-coercion?
Well, it points out Christ used patience when attracting disciples. His miracles were to illuminate truth and inspire faith, not to coerce belief. He explicitly rejected being a political messiah ruling by force. And even when he bore witness to the truth, the document says, he refused to impose the truth by force on those who argued against him.
Okay.
They even cite the parable of the wheat and the weeds, let them both grow together until the harvest. That's interpreted as showing God's patience and refusal to use force prematurely.
And the apostles followed that example.
Yeah.
Even when facing pushback.
Absolutely. They aim to convert primarily through the power of the word of God, not through coercion or devices unworthy of the gospel. They respected legitimate government, render to Caesar and all that.
Right.
But they also knew their ultimate loyalty, famously declaring it is necessary to obey God rather than men when there was a direct conflict. So it acknowledges that tension.
So what about, well, let's be frank, what about the church's own history? For a lot of people, hearing the church champion religious freedom might sound ironic, given certain historical periods. Does the document address that?
It does, albeit somewhat indirectly. It's a moment of, I think, significant honesty. It concedes that in the life of the people of God, there has at times appeared a way of acting that was hardly in accord with the spirit of the gospel or even opposed to it.
That acknowledgement.
Yes, it doesn't list specific events, but it acknowledges failures. However, it immediately follows by saying that the doctrine that no one is to be coerced into faith has always stood firm. So it draws a distinction between the consistent teaching and the sometimes flawed actions of people throughout history. It suggests the core principle was always there, even if not always followed.
Like a leaven of the gospel working slowly over time.
That's the phrase it uses, yeah. Quietly working to foster this recognition of human dignity and freedom from religious coercion. And connecting this to the bigger modern picture, the Declaration notes that religious freedom is widely recognized now. It's in most constitutions, international documents.
Right.
Yet it also expresses deep sorrow that there are still governments today actively trying to deter people from religion, making life very difficult and dangerous for religious communities. So the struggle isn't over.
Which makes this whole deep dive incredibly relevant for you listening right now. The document saw this coming. All nations are coming into even closer unity. People of different cultures, different religions, living side by side.
Exactly. And because of that growing interconnectedness, it argues that for peace and harmony to exist worldwide, it is necessary that religious freedom be everywhere, provided with an effective constitutional guarantee, and that respect be shown for the high duty and right of man freely to lead his religious life in society. It basically links global peace directly to respecting religious freedom everywhere.
It's quite profound when you think about it. This declaration, claiming roots in both human reason and divine revelation, championing universal civil rights while also demanding responsible freedom. It really invites all of us, doesn't it, to think about that delicate balance between our deepest personal convictions, how we express them with others, and what's needed for a just, peaceful society, especially now. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope it's given you a fresh perspective, maybe some powerful ideas to chew on. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.